Okay, so we are continuing domain and range. When it comes to domain and range, we are practicing writing it as an inequality. So we remember the basics when it comes to inequality and writing it as writing the domain and range is, and I'll go over interval notation too, so and kind of give it a mixture. But if the graph is a closed circle, okay, or if it touches and bounces back, then we use less than or equal to. If it is an open circle or an arrow at the ends, then we use just less than. This is inequalities. The same thing goes for intervals, but if it's a closed circle or touches, then we use brackets. If it's an open circle or an arrow, we use parentheses. Okay, so let's go over it. I know these specifically say domain and range on either side, but I'm going to go ahead and go over both domain and range for every single graph. So remember, domain is the all possible x values when moving from left to right. Okay, and then the opposite of that is the range. This is all possible y values from moving low to high. Okay, so keep that in mind. So if I look at number 1, if I put my pencil on the farthest left, so I'm doing domain first, okay? If I put my pencil on the farthest left point that it has, that's this arrowhead right here. That means forever and ever and ever to the left, so that's negative infinity. Since it is an arrowhead, we are going to use less than. We're talking about domain, so x. Then we put our pencil on the farthest right that it goes, and the farthest right that it goes is also an arrowhead, which means forever and ever to the right, which means positive infinity. And then since it is an arrowhead, we also use less than. Since it is negative infinity to positive infinity, the other alternative would be all reals, which is a double R. If I go for the range, this is low to high. So if I put my pencil on the lowest point, that's this right here, okay, this edge, the lowest point. So how low is this on the y-axis? This is 0, -1, -2. It touches and bounces back. So since it touches, we use less than or equal to. This is the range we're talking about, so it's the y values. And then the highest point are these two arrowheads, even at the top. But since they're both arrows, that means it goes forever and ever up, so that's positive infinity. And then since it is an arrow, we use less than. This would not be a case of all reals because it's not negative infinity to positive infinity. One thing that I didn't want to note yesterday, but I will note today as you're looking at your answers, whenever you have an inequality like this and one of the sides is an infinity but the other one is not, what they like to do, especially on the EOC, is they like to focus on the side that is just the value, not the infinity part. So your answer could be written like this. So that means that you could see an answer where it says -2 is less than or equal to y, just FYI. Number 2, if I start with the domain, this is from left to right. So if I put my pencil on the farthest left, how far left is this on the x-axis? Well, that's 0, -1. Since it touches and turns, it's less than or equal to. We are talking about the domain, so this is your x values. And then how far right does it go? How far right is this? This is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the x-axis. Since it touches and bounces back, it's less than or equal to. Okay. And then the range is low to high, so your lowest point, how low does it go? This is 0, -1, -2. It touches and turns, so touches means less than or equal to. Since we are talking about the range, this is your y values. And then how high does it go? That's up here. How high is this up the y-axis? This is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It touches, so that's less than or equal to. Okay. If I continue, number 3, if I start with my domain, I go from left to right. So how far left is this? If I put my pencil on the farthest left, this is the arrowhead over here. That means forever and ever to the left, so that's negative infinity. Since it is an arrow, we are going to use less than. And we are talking about the domain, so that is the x values. Then I put my pencil on the farthest right, that's this point right here. And how far right is this on the x-axis? Well, this is -1 on the x-axis. It is a closed circle, so that means we use less than or equal to. Again, just like earlier, if you have one side that has negative infinity but the other one is not, what they're going to focus on is just the side with the value. Because this is a true statement. It's all values of x that are less than or equal to -1. So it could be written either way. The range, low to high, the lowest point it goes is right here. How low is this on the y-axis? Well, on the y-axis, that is +2. It is a closed circle, so that means it's going to be less than or equal to. We are talking about the range, which is your y values. And how high does it go? Well, that's an arrowhead, and that means forever and ever up. So that's positive infinity. And since it's an arrowhead, we use less than. Again, this is one of those cases where they will focus on the side with the value, so they'll ignore the side with the infinity sign. So you could look for an answer that looks like this. Okay. Number 4, domain first, which means all your x's from left to right. So how far left is this? This is 0, 1, 2, 3, -3. It touches and turns, so touches is less than or equal to x-axis. Then I put my pencil on the farthest right. Those are both arrows, which means forever and ever to the right. And since they are arrows, we use less than. Again, this is one of those cases where one side is an infinite and one side is not. So they're going to focus on the side that is not. And you could see your answer written like this, ignoring the infinite sign. So be prepared. The range is low to high. So if I put my pencil on the lowest, that's this arrowhead right here. That means forever and ever down. So that's -infinity. Since it's an arrow, we use less than, and we are talking about the range, so these are your y values. If I put my pencil on the highest point, that's this arrow right here. It's forever and ever up, so that means positive infinity. And since it is an arrowhead, we use less than. Since I have negative infinity to positive infinity, that's also written as all reals. Okay, so if I continue, just to get more practice, 4 more questions. If I start with my domain here, that means left to right. So if I put my pencil on the farthest left, that's this point right here. That means how far left is this on the x-axis? Well, this is 0, so this is +1. Since it touches and turns, this is less than or equal to. We are talking about the domain, so that means x. And then if I put my pencil on the farthest right, that's both these arrowheads, which means forever and ever to the right. And since it is an arrow, we are going to use less than. You could see it written like this, or just like before, since one side of the inequalities is infinite, they could focus on the side that is just the value. So you could look for an answer that is 1 is less than or equal to x, or x is greater than or equal to 1. Both are correct. If I look at the range, this is low to high, so my lowest point is right here. It's an arrowhead. Since it's going forever and ever down, that's -infinity. Since it's an arrowhead, it's less than my y values, since it's the range. And if I put my pencil on the highest point, that's also an arrow. That means forever and ever up. So that means positive infinity. And since it is an arrow, we are going to use less than. Since it's -infinity to positive infinity, that means all reals. Number 6, if I go from left to right for my domain, if I put my pencil on the farthest left, that's this edge over here. How far left is this on the x-axis? This is 0, so this is -1. It touches and then turns, so that's less than or equal to. Since it is my domain, this is your x values. If I put my pencil on the farthest right, this is, how far right is this? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And since it touches and turns back around, this is less than or equal to. And this would be my answer. My range is low to high. So this is how low is this? This is 0, 1, -1, -2 on the y-axis. Since it touches and turns around, this is less than or equal to the y's. And how high does it go? How high does it go off the y-axis? This is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And since it touches and turns around, this is less than or equal to. And there's my answer. Number 7, how far left does it go for my domain? Well, if I put my pencil on the farthest left, that's an arrowhead. That means it's going to go forever and ever to the left, so that's -infinity. Since it is an arrow, we use less than my x values. Then I put my pencil on the farthest right, that's this point right here. How far right is it on my x-axis? Well, this is 0 and this is -1. Since it is a closed circle, we are going to use less than or equal to. This is one of those cases where if one side is infinity, then what they're going to do is block it off and just focus on the side with the value. So you could see your answer as x is less than or equal to -1. Both are correct, but they more than less use this format. Range, low to high. If I put my pencil on the lowest point, that's also this arrowhead. That's -infinity because it's forever and ever down. Since it is an arrowhead, I use less than my y values. If I put my pencil on the highest point, that's this dot. How high is that up the y-axis? That's +2. And since it is a closed circle, we use less than or equal to. Again, because one side is infinite and the other side is not, I'm going to focus on the side that is not. And this is how your answer could be written, especially on today's paper. Number 8, if I go for my domain, that's left to right. So how far left is this? It's an arrowhead, so that means forever and ever to the left. That's -infinity. It's an arrowhead, so that means less than my x values since it's domain. If I put my pencil on the farthest right, that's also an arrowhead, which means forever and ever to the right, so that's +infinity. And since it is an arrowhead, we use less than. -infinity to +infinity is all reals. Lastly, my range on this one, low to high. So my lowest point is this corner right here. How low is this on the y-axis? Well, this is 0 and this is 1. Since it touches and bounces back, this is less than or equal to my y value since it is the range. How high does it go? This is the highest point, which is an arrow, which means forever and ever up. So we use +infinity. And since it's an arrowhead, we use less than. We could see it written like this, or we could see it where instead of focusing on the infinite side, they will just focus on the value side. So this is y is less than or equal to y, or y is greater than or equal to 1. Both ways correct.